I never doubted my salvation. I didn't have any problems with assurance. But in my later teens, I started having a lot of issues with anxiety. And I don't just mean like nerves. I mean, I was really struggling a lot. And mental health is like, everyone has different beliefs about, chemical imbalance and medication and all this stuff. But God really convicted me that in my life, at that time, anxiety was a sin and it was completely controlling me.
We are all saved the same way, but each of our stories are different. This is My Grace Life Story, a series of podcasts where members of Grace Life Church of the Shoals share their stories of redemption and grace. Here now is Senior Associate Pastor Matt Fowler.
Welcome back to another episode of My Grace Life Story. I am here, of course, with Brother Tim Martin, who is running all things media for us today. And we have with us in our studio today, Austin and Elspeth Burbank. So these two are church members here at Grace Life, and so we wanted to talk to them a little bit about their Grace Life story and how the Lord has worked in their lives. So Austin, just start with you. If you would just kind of introduce yourself, maybe a couple of facts about yourself, and then Elspeth will do the same with you, all right?
Yeah, so I've been at Grace Life since maybe 2003 when my family has started moving to this church, and so I grew up here for most of my cognitive life in this church. But
how old are you now, Austin?
27.
Okay, 27.
Yeah,
so you've been here just about the whole time.
Yeah, born in 95.
There you go.
So,
right.
but yeah, I grew up in this church. Went to school. I grew up in Killen. Went to school at Rogers, graduated there, and stayed local. Went to Northwest Shoals Community College and transferred to UNA and graduated from there.
What was your degree in?
I graduated with a entertainment industry on a business emphasis.
And so in what way, Austin works for Ferris Wholesale, in what way are you using entertainment at Ferris Wholesale right now?
Well, we stay pretty busy, and so it's a lot of planning and organizing, and that's what I've liked to do. And so I try to take those things and use those in wherever area I can. So,
okay.
But that's what I used. So that's what I'm Ferris Wholesale right now.
Hey, listen, I've got a physical education degree. I don't use it in any way at Grace Life Church of the Shoals. So, I'm a guy who's definitely working outside of my degree field. So,
yeah.
All right, good. Elspeth, some facts about yourself. Introduce yourself to us.
Yeah, I'm Elspeth. I'm from the UK originally. I've lived in the States for 3 years now. And yeah, I've traveled a lot, lived in a lot of places. This is new, living in the South, but it's been good. It feels like home now. And we love it. It's been great.
All right, good. All right, if you guys would, maybe give me the 5-minute version of your conversion testimony. I know that's probably something that we could all sit around and talk about how the Lord saved us and spend a lot of time doing that, and that would be very beneficial. But maybe the quicker version, and Austin, we'll start with you again about how the Lord saved you, because I know some of your testimony eventually kind of intertwines with you guys' relationship and how you guys got to know each other. So, we may explore some of that too. But the quick version of you coming to know the Lord.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, I grew up in this church, was seen as a good kid that was raised in the church, had a good family, basically as a kid who would do anything that they were supposed to do in the eyes of my parents and friends and family. When I was probably in my teenage years, maybe 15, 16, that started looking different for me. Didn't really take seriously the things that I was supposed to be doing. It was more of an outward appearance. The way I described it was a foot in the world and a foot in the church.
Gotcha. Kind
of holding that mid-ground. People can see who I am, but they can't see truly who I am.
Sure.
That accelerated into my college years when I graduated high school. I was really, really testing that line, testing where God would have me. I felt like I could do stuff on my own, that I can deal with these things. I can stand my ground. I really don't need all this. I don't need faith. I don't need all these other things. So I fought through that in the way I did, had my relationships with my friends and then relationships with just people who I wanted to have relationships with. So I did that with all my relationships. I was more selfish. I found that when I was actually trying to do the right thing, I would get angry at myself for trying to do the right thing and then angry at myself for not doing the right thing. So I was always in this turmoil of just fighting with my own sin and realizing what I needed to do. And it's just I knew I was sinful. Right. And so I never really backed off of the fact that I knew I needed to trust God more, and I just never did.
Yeah.
And so that all came to a point about 2015. At the end of that year, God had really put me in some positions that really tested me, especially in a certain situation that I was in. I knew that if I had moved forward with that I would probably not even be in the church anymore.
Wow.
So going to that, I had conversations with Brother Steve. There was mission trips that were being planned, and I was able to talk to Brother Steve, counsel about going to Edinburgh, Scotland. I told him I didn't want to have a wrong motive in the reason in going. I just needed to figure out, I needed time away from my daily life to figure out my relationship with God, because God had been working on me in different areas of my life.
So what at this point, what makes you think, hey, a trip to Scotland? I mean, you got this turmoil going on, and you know,
Yeah.
kind of like you described, a foot in the world, a foot in the church, and even coming down to hey, if I go this way, I may just leave the church altogether. And obviously, I know the Holy Spirit is at work in the background of all of this. But in your mind, what makes you think maybe a trip to Scotland is what I need? I mean, what was your thought process there?
Well, my thought process is anything to get me out of my everyday life here.
Gotcha.
And maybe that would be just focusing on what I'm doing as far as why I'm there.
Okay.
Like I said, I have many conversations with Brother Steve about, I don't want to go if it makes other people think, well, he's not who he, says he is. Why is a non-Christian?
Right.
I still describe myself as a non-born again Christian. I was a Christian, but I wasn't born again. Right. So
Gotcha.
I didn't want to give people the false impression of me going, but I knew the Lord was working in me. So I thought that going on that trip, I always had a connection as far as I had a super interest in Scotland and the UK and just those type of areas. But so it was just a way for me to kind of, okay, this is a place I can go. I'm going to be saturated with, surrounded by these people. Maybe this will help me figure out just what God's trying to, teach me through all of this.
Gotcha.
And just unplug myself from what I've been doing daily here, because it's obviously not working.
Right.
So and so we went through that whole week. There was many people who poured their life into me and wisdom, and one of the guys that was on the trip, we were doing door to door, and he just asked me, he said, how long have you been a Christian? And then that's when it kind of just like this epiphany happened where, I call myself a Christian, but I can't really tell you just how long I've actually been a born again Christian. Like I just have all these motions, but that's really what made the wheels turned really fast on that. By that last Sunday, Brother Brett Beasley from West Frankfort, Illinois, Second Baptist, West Frankfort, good brother, preaching on, I believe it was, can a good God send good people to hell? Right. And so that was my conviction melting point at that. And so
was this in your home church, Elspeth, this sermon?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Gotcha. Yeah. So we were with Grace Edinburgh, Pastor Alan McLachlan. Yeah. So that's what really helped me. It was what was used to push me over the edge of where I needed to be, and God brought me to a full conviction at that point, and I realized that there was a change in my heart. Yeah. And that the actions and my motivations for things were different coming through that. Obviously, going through the week, segueing into Elspeth, she was also there. It's not somebody that we spent a whole lot of time the first 1 or 2 days, but as the week went on, we talked more, and I saw her and how she interacted with her family, and that had a huge impact on me. Right. The way that she reached out to all the team, the way that she her whole countenance and the way that she handled everything. There was just something different about her. So we got to talking more and more. So she is actually a big instrument in what God kind of used me to kind of, I guess, model, like, hey, these are things that you need to be looking for.
So you had a second epiphany.
I had a second one. Absolutely. So God not only brought me to conviction, but he also opened my eyes to, like, this is also something you need to be looking for.
Maybe there's another possibility.
There is another possibility.
The Lord was good to you in a number of ways in Scotland, right?
Absolutely.
So, good. Yeah, thank you. All right, Elspeth, a little bit, your testimony coming into the Lord and how the Lord worked in your life through the years.
Sure. Yeah. So as Austin's already said, my dad is a church planter in Scotland. He had been in the ministry for most of my life. So growing up, church was always a huge part of our life. Right. When I was 5 years old, my parents went to be missionaries in the Middle East. So we left everything behind. We lived in a very difficult country to be in. Some of the missionaries that were there were martyred while we were there. It was a really big thing for my parents to be there. So I knew how important their faith was to them. I knew the sacrifices they were making. And we always grew up there was never a time I doubted the Bible or doubted that God existed. I could see my parents and how passionate they were about sharing their faith. Right. So it was always a big part of our lives. And I was the sort of stereotypical eldest child, wanted to please mom and dad all the time. I was always the good kid, and I knew that they'd be happy if I made a profession of faith. And somebody gave me a book when I was about 11 years old. It was called A Different Life, and it was about a girl that had been kind of struggling with her faith and coming to the realization that she was not actually saved. She was relying on her parents' faith. And that really, the Holy Spirit used that in me just to show me that that's what I was doing, that I needed to repent and believe. It couldn't just be to tick the boxes or to, for anyone to be happy with my obedience, but it had to be genuine. So I was saved at 11. I got baptized in the church that we were at there.
Was this still in the Middle East? Were you guys still in the Middle East?
We were
at this
back
time?
in the UK at that point. My dad was a pastor in England. A lot of people would stop their testimony there and be like, "Yeah, I knew I was saved. I never doubted my salvation. I didn't have any problems with assurance." But in my later teens, I started having a lot of issues with anxiety. And I don't just mean like nerves. I mean, I was really struggling a lot. Right. And mental health is like, everyone has different beliefs about chemical imbalance and medication and all this stuff. But God really convicted me that in my life at that time, anxiety was a sin and it was completely controlling me. So I lost a ton of weight. I was just really not living life as I should. I would wake up super early and just struggle, and it was just constant. It really consumed me, and God really convicted me that that was sin. And it took a few years to kind of realize this isn't something just happening to me. This is something that I need to work on. And God really blessed me through those years. I think when He brings us to an end of ourselves, sometimes it's when we draw closest to Him, and I definitely feel that in those years, my relationship with the Lord really, really grew because I needed Him so much more. And of course, we need Him all the time, but I didn't sort of realize that until that point. And I think a lot of pride comes with that, like I was saying before about people pleasing, being a pastor's kid. Sure. A lot of that pride was kind of knocked out at that point because it was like, I have a big sin I'm struggling with. I'm somebody that needs help. And so God really used that in my life to draw Him closer to Him. And I can say I have so much peace now. He's given me that wonderful peace that is like nothing else in this world. So I always share that as part of my testimony too, because I feel like it's definitely when God drew me closer to Himself.
Yeah, amen. Thank you for sharing that. All right, so the Lord brings you guys to faith, obviously at different times, different locations. But let's kind of revisit this mission trip to Scotland, and let's talk about the second epiphany, as Brother Tim has said. So he gives Austin, we'll stick with this word, epiphany, right? I mean, Elspeth, was the Lord giving you that same sense at that time, or were you just like, hey, look, it's another team from America, they'll be going home? I mean, what's going through your mind at this time?
So I actually picked the team up from the airport. Okay. And so I'd met Brother Steve a few years before, and I knew a couple of people on the team that were coming. Rachel.
So this is pretty early, like in the partnership.
It is,
Okay, all right. I couldn't remember the exact timeline. All this kind of runs together in my mind.
I think we had one other team from Anchored in Truth before that.
So real early.
I had gone to London and helped Barry King with one of his teams, and Dacus Wall and Jacob Danley and Rachel Danley had come on that trip. So I knew them, they were coming. So I was waiting at the airport for this big team coming. I knew Brother Steve and I knew these people I'd met. So it was just this sea of faces. So I really didn't notice Austin. There were just a big group of people.
Man, Austin.
I was excited to see Brother Steve, excited to just briefly greet them, but it was kind of like, we've got a schedule, we've got to go, we've got to get everyone, if you have your luggage, let's go. So I briefly shook hands with Austin, but I don't have any kind of regulation.
It was like, oh, remember the first time that you met her? I was like, yeah, she shook my hand and went, okay. And then we kept, get your bag
and let's
get to the van.
So.
Yes. Whereas for you, I was the only person, it was just one person, whereas I was meeting this big team.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So walk me through how you guys' relationship kind of, from that point. Obviously, I know it wasn't like you met, love at first sight, we're all getting married. I mean, how did this go? Because obviously, Austin, you come back to the U.S. I mean, this was just a short-term mission trip, and Elspeth, obviously, you live there in Scotland. And so, how did the Lord end up kind of putting you two together? I mean, what? Tell me some of that story.
Yeah, so I can give my viewpoint of it from the beginning, but I still joke with her. But I mean, it really wasn't till like halfway through the week when I noticed that we were probably hanging out with each other more than what we had been. We would find ourselves we would just find ourselves talking to each other more than anybody else.
Right.
And so I just joked with her that it was like halfway through the week. I was like, oh, she's really interesting. I've been talking to her. She's great. And it probably wasn't until like one of the last days I was just like, and she's, I think she's pretty beautiful too. So, it was a win-win.
There was the order there.
So we just slowly started to talk more and more. And it was just, that was what I enjoyed about it, is we just talked about everything and anything. But yeah, we just, by that last week, I don't know, you like to tell that end of the story about when I left before I went back, but I'll let you tell that part.
Yeah, so we just really enjoyed getting to know each other, and I thought I would like to keep in touch with this guy, but I don't want to initiate that. It has to come from him.
Right.
And the whole team was saying goodbye to everyone, they're leaving, and he walks away without saying a word. And I thought, okay, Lord, I guess that's your way of saying it's not meant to go anywhere. Then he comes back in and he throws a note into my hand. We have this awkward hug and he runs away again. And it's a note with just gratitude for the week and our hospitality, and then also saying, I really enjoyed getting to know you. Here are my details if you want to stay in touch.
And what was going through your head when you were writing this note? I mean, was this like, man, I've got to word everything just right. How do I sign my name? I mean, what was that?
It was a lot of. I probably stayed up really late that night trying to figure out the wording because I didn't want to come across as too forceful.
Yeah.
But I was like, I can't just give her a note because that looks suspicious. So, but I was already going to write her parents a note for having us for the week and all that kind of stuff. I was like, so I'll give her both letters. That way she'll see both of them.
Okay, I got you.
And I'm saying, and I hope she doesn't just give both to her, her dad. But because that week's a blur even for him. Like,
I bet.
So she even, from what she's told me, she goes like, after she told him about, hey, Austin's asked if he could stay in touch with me, just wanted to let you guys know. And they're like, her dad's like, which one was Austin?
Yeah.
She took the note, and I'm glad that she was the only one that saw it at that point. And
there you go.
I ended up, talking to her dad a little bit later, said, just so you know, is it okay that we continue to stay in touch? And so he gave me that blessing, so that was good. But he knew who I was at that point.
Yeah,
so
I got you.
But
he probably knew more about it than you even realized.
Yes.
Right? So
I'm sure him and Brother Steve had many talks about who I was.
Wow.
As far as he knew, the only thing that he knew about me is that I liked the Pittsburgh Penguins, and that was about it.
Okay, I got you.
But
all right. So
anyway.
how long did you guys court, date, whatever term we want to put on that? What was that season? Was that?
Yeah. So that was June of 2016. We sent letters. We did email. And occasionally we could Skype when we were both available. It was a 6-hour time difference.
Right.
So we did that for probably, I would say, all the way up until I visited you the next time. We never really started an official relationship. We just kept in touch for about a whole year, and I came back in August of 2017.
Gotcha.
And then that's when we said, this is something we want to do.
Okay.
And so that really, I guess, became our courting process.
Okay. Gotcha.
As far as an official thing. And then...
Yeah, so maybe 2 years roughly between actually being official and then actually get married.
Deciding that this is something we want to pursue.
So you guys get married. Was it always the plan that if you got married, you were coming to the States, or was there some talk about, hey, maybe we're married and we stay in the UK and we serve the Lord there? What were those conversations like? We're glad you ended up at Grace Life Church of the Shoals. Pastor Allie, if you happen to listen to this, don't be mad at us. We are glad you came back here. So, but what were those conversations like? How much prayer went into that? And
Well, this is what I really appreciated about Elspeth, that we were able, that our relationship was unique in the fact that we just didn't have the opportunity to sit down and just sit and be with each other. We had to communicate. We had to talk.
Right.
It wasn't just this thing where we could just relax and say nothing to each other. So we have always had this really good communication that I think that was built because it was that was the only way we could.
Right.
And so anytime that we had conversations, that was something that we originally first talked about before we even talked about getting married. And, what would it look like? Would you move here? Would I move there? And so we both had the understanding of when it comes to that point, we're fine either way. And so whatever the plans look like, we'll just go where the Lord takes us, and then that's, we prayed about it, but as we got engaged and we started looking at the paperwork and what processes it would be for me to move there and what processes it would take for her to move here, it just made more sense for us to start this route, at least first.
Sure.
And then if the Lord opened up for any reason for us to move back to the UK, then that door would be open. But I just knew from a responsibility standpoint, it would be easier for me to do what I needed to do, not only as a husband, but I would be able to do those things here better than I probably could over there to start off a marriage with. Right. And so we really had that understanding moving forward, and we always knew that there was a possibility that, I was always open to say I would move there, but you can tell them what your advice was from your parents about that if you want to.
Well, I'd had it modeled, I guess, by my parents. When my dad was first considering going to the Middle East, somebody asked my mom, well, do you feel called to the Muslim world? Do you feel called to go? And she said, well, I'm called to Ali. I'm called to him. Yeah, and so, of course, I have to go where he goes because he's my calling. And I felt very strongly the same thing, that Austin was the leader. He was the head of this, what would become our marriage. And so I needed to follow him. And so I had to realize that from day one, that this was a possibility. It wasn't like we dated for 2 years and then made that decision. Sure. It was always in my mind that this was a possibility. And I did kind of wrestle with that a bit. Europe is very dark, and I always felt that it needs Christians. And it's like the Lord had to give me a mental slap and be like, well, I don't need you. Like, I can, use plenty of other people. It's not like I had to stay in Europe. But it was hard thinking, okay, I'm going to go to an area of the country that has a lot of churches and is very kind of saturated in the gospel. Right. But anyway, that was a long way of explaining it. But
no, that's good.
It was always in my mind that I would move.
So, Elspeth, when you, how long, so did you move here? I can't remember the timeline. From the time you moved here, did you guys pretty much get married pretty quick after you moved here, or were you here for a season before you guys actually got married? What was the timeline on that?
Yeah, so we did what's called a fiancé visa. Okay. If you've ever seen the show 90 Day Fiancé, that's what we did. So we, probably on arrival in the States...
Y'all could have been on that show,
We probably could have.
Yeah, there you go.
We had 90 days to get married on my arrival in the States. So I moved, and I lived with John and Joyce McIntosh for 5 weeks. Yeah. And then we got married. Right. So I was here for just a few weeks, and it really was just kind of wedding prep and kind of getting everything organized.
So let's kind of wind around to this. So was that your first time to come to Grace Life, or had you been here for a True Church conference like with your mom and dad? Or I know your dad's been at least a couple of times. Or was that, okay, I'm moving, I'm getting married, I'm going to start a new church home? I mean, all that happened at the same time?
No, I had visited Austin while we dated twice on 2 different occasions. Yeah, my very first Sunday at Grace Life, Brother Steve asked if I would stand up in the pulpit the next Sunday and talk about the live stream. But yes, I had been, I think maybe 4 Sundays over the time that we dated. But yes, it was kind of new. But yes, I had visited.
Okay. So just how different is church, Grace Life Church? I mean, obviously, we great relationship with your dad and that partnership's there. But obviously, Scotland's different than the U.S. and Grace Life of the Shoals is obviously different than even a lot of our partner churches that we love. So how different was it? How big of an adjustment was it for you to not only move from Scotland, but particularly the local church aspect of it? How tough was that to kind of come and fit in? What was your, if you can remember, like your first time here, what were your thoughts? If you can remember back to that, give me some details about, okay, God's transplanting you now into Grace Life Church of the Shoals. What was that like?
It's very different. I had never been in a room so the first Sunday I came, I went to a small group. I'd never been in a room with that many people who were exactly the same age as me and who were church members. Like, that was a very new thing for me. Right. We'd always been in small churches that were just starting, where it was everyone was friends with everyone. You were all different ages. Right. It's very rare to have people that were exactly the same age. Yeah. So to come to a class that was like 25 and 26-year-old girls, I was like, wow, this is really unique.
Do you remember who was teaching the class?
I went to your wife's class, actually. Oh, okay. She and Sarah.
Okay. Yeah, Sarah and Kristen.
I guess it was because we were college age or just above.
They kind of have the single ladies a lot of times.
So every time I visited, I went to their class. And the church is huge. I mean, we had watched the live stream for years. Right. But coming into the auditorium, it's so big. It was very overwhelming. I had met several staff members before when they had come to the UK, but yeah, coming here, it just felt very surreal to sit in a place that you've watched for so many years. That was quite surreal. Yeah, very, very different. And then trying to sort of integrate, coming and visiting was kind of neat because I was excited to see Austin and get to know his church, but coming as like planning to be here was really different. Just thinking, okay, I've got to put some roots down in this church. And I found that a lot of people had never been new before. A lot of the people my age had grown up at Grace Life. They'd never been to a church. It was just, everyone was at high school together, or everyone had the same teachers in Sunday school or whatever. It was just, I was very new, very different. And of course I was here for just a few months before COVID happened too. So I felt like I was just getting to know people, and then everything shut down. So it took a long time, I guess, to kind of feel settled in the church in that way. But it definitely feels like my church home now for sure.
Okay. Yeah. All right, and so you're here for a season. Obviously, you've been a part of missions for a really long time, just in your family, and by virtue of kind of calling God put on you guys' lives. But now you serve on staff with Anchored in Truth and do a multitude of different things there with Brother Steve and Luke and Dr. Sill and all the Anchored in Truth team. And so, how has that been a fit for you, kind of coming in and not just a church member now, but also someone who serves in Anchored in Truth and serves with missions? Has that been an easy fit? Was that an easy transition because you'd done some of that stuff? Maybe not the same thing, but a lot of that type of work in the past. So how did all that come about?
Yeah, it's been a huge blessing. Yeah. I should say that first. I've never worked with believers before, and so that was really neat to come and, everyone's a Christian, and it's really nice. Yeah. It's a blessing for sure. It's very different from the type of work I was doing before. I taught English as a foreign language to adults in a language school, but I had done a lot of admin for my dad, and then I had done some things for Barry King too with Grace Baptist Partnership in England. And so I kind of knew how Anchored in Truth worked, at least from a distance. Like I said before, I had got to know Brother Steve on various trips. And he approached me about the job, and it's been wonderful. It's been such a blessing. I enjoy it so much. Communicating with people from all around the world is such a neat thing. To hear what God is doing in their countries is just wonderful. And to try and personalize that for the people here at Grace Life has been great too, to meet with the mission leaders from small groups and just say, I don't think you realize how much it means when you send something. I know from personal testament, my family has been so encouraged. Like, my parents got an anniversary card one year, and they had never received an anniversary card that said, to our pastor and his wife, because you just can't buy that kind of thing in Europe. And so it meant so much to them that a small group would take time to write that and mail it.
Awesome.
And so kind of seeing it from that side as well has just been very valuable, I think. So it's been a great fit. I've really enjoyed it. It's very fast paced. There's a lot to do, but it's been great. God really blessed me with that job.
Amen. So Austin, so Elspeth's brand new at Grace Life when she gets here, but as you said in your testimony, I mean, for the most part, you were here. You're kind of like me. I think I came here when I was about 7 or 8, somewhere in their second grade, however old you are in second grade. And so, you're a lifer. As Elspeth has said, there's a lot of people who are lifers here at Grace Life here. But, what's as you've grown up here, are there certain people, are there certain individuals, are there certain sermons that stick out in your mind as to, God working in your life? And I know sometimes we can't boil all that down to one sermon, but tell me a little bit about just your journey here at Grace Life and who's been instrumental in discipling you. Maybe it was a small group class. Maybe it was just a brother in the Lord. Like I said, maybe it was a sermon or sermon series that God used to just cement some things in your life. Give me some feedback on that.
Yeah, well, I would say that it is kind of hard to boil it down to just maybe everything, but I can just say from a personal standpoint that obviously that Brother Tom has been very instrumental in my life here, just always seeing him. I know we had somebody before him, but Brother Tom is really the one that I kind of knew. Sure. And just the way that he served and the way that he used music and the way that he views music, especially as a person who uses it in a ministry aspect for the church. And and that he would be the first one to say that the pastor is the worship leader, not him. Right. And just having that mindset, it helped me when I got into music. And so he's always kind of been that one that was an encouragement in that area for me. And so he's been one that's very instrumental in my life, and as far as even spiritually. But just the way that he leads spoke a lot to me even before we got as close as we are now, where he's given me opportunities to help also leading the church through music and stuff like that.
So when did you get into like music and obviously were you doing music before you were a believer, and then the Lord maybe has kind of taken that and directed your path a little differently on that?
So music has been pretty big, and at least in my life, especially at a younger age, it's just we enjoyed listening to music growing up. My parents always had different types of music, and so it was definitely more secular music when I was growing up that I enjoyed the most, but we did grow up enjoying, like Amy Grant and those type of
the old CCM days.
Yes. So,
Michael W. Smith.
Yes.
Stephen Curtis Chapman in there. So yeah.
We grew up listening to Christian contemporary music as well, because that was the thing you did as a kid growing up in the early thousands, is you listened to the contemporary Christian artists. But probably about. Me and my brother got guitars probably at a young age, and so my granddaddy gave us a book. And so we taught ourselves how to play guitar, and probably wasn't till late middle school, early high school that I started trying to actually sing. So I had a music director in high school that really pushed me to do that, and so he's the one that kind of made me do it.
Awesome.
And so it kind of spun off from there. And so then it wasn't till, and even me and my brother actually we would play at a few churches for some music events and some type of some small revival type things, but my heart was not in that whatsoever at that
Was that
point
more
in
of
my
a,
life.
hey, this guy can sing, so let's just sign him up, right?
Yes, and so it's kind of like a word of mouth thing. Like, oh, these people, they go to church and they play music. Let's
get them, right?
Yeah. So, and I don't think there was anything wrong with that, but I was definitely not in the mindset to say, hey, this is something that I love to do, and I want to go there and I want to play this music for these people. And it was kind of a forced thing for me. But it wasn't until my conversion that I viewed music in a different way, especially through the way that it's done at church. And like I said, Brother Tom was very instrumental in that. I know that kind of deviated from the original question.
No, that's good. That's good.
But so that was really kind of my musical journey and the way that I viewed it. I mean, I've played some other places, and then now I primarily, when I do play music, it's in a church setting or church focused or whatever it may be. But going back more to the original question, as far as small groups go, I can think of, and I'll just name these people, and I don't have time to go into every single thing that they've ever done for me, but I think about Dr. Briley, Jason Briley, even West Voorhees, I believe they taught a class, a sixth grade boys class, which I think Dr. Briley is still doing sixth grade boys class.
He needs a plaque in the classroom.
Yes, he does.
He's a permanent fixture in the sixth grade boys class.
He's going to have a few extra halos for some of this stuff.
He said at least 2 Fowler boys passed through, so yes, there's 2 halos he needs right there.
Yes.
So.
But him and West Voorhees, they taught that class together. I just remember just the way in which they reached out to us. And I mean, I can name every single small group leader I had growing up, but those are probably the first ones that I just remember being like, this is something that I feel like I just remember more.
Sure, yeah.
And so, and I remember men like Jeff Kitchens, who was teaching a class, Mike Rodriguez, very influential. We actually go back with the Rodriguez family. He was probably my first pastor.
Okay, all right.
So we have known that family, and they've been super influential in our life. Him and Miss Bobby Ann both. We grew up with their kids, and we love them, and they've been very helpful to us, and especially Elspeth's life too. Now that they've gotten to know her, and so it's good to have those people that we have a history, but we also ended up coming to the same church with one another.
Yeah.
More towards my conversion and more towards my probably more convicting years. The biggest men that were influential were my small group leaders was John McIntosh, Corey Thomas, and Mark Tucker.
Yeah.
Those 3 men helped me sort through a lot of stuff.
Amen.
And I'm very thankful and probably in debt to them for some of the advice and their willingness to sit down with me and talk with me. But I would have not ever had the time or day with them unless I was in that small group class.
Yeah, right.
And so I just think about those men. But as far as pastorally, of course, yourself and, Brother Tim and Brother David Young, of course, Brother Jeff, just sitting through the years, not thinking I'm soaking up things in. And then at my conversion, I'm like, I really wish that I would have paid more attention.
Yeah.
And I would be able to actually have these conversations with my wife. Like, oh, yeah, I do remember that. I guess one of the biggest sermons that I remember from Brother Jeff was that stay in the boat.
Yeah.
And that's probably one of the ones that I've probably held on to probably the most from what I can remember in those early years.
Yeah.
And I know it's one he's gone back to before,
Right,
but it's one that I remember quoting to my brother when he graduated high school, and it's just something I always go back to. But those men have been very influential in my time here at Grace Life, and ones that I can still go to and ask them something, and them still be able to give me the advice they gave me however many years ago it was, and it still be just as impactful.
Yeah.
And I think I'm very thankful for them.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that completely answers the question.
That was great. So, Elspeth, obviously you haven't been here quite as long, so you don't have maybe as deep a roots as Austin does here, but some influences in your life just as a Christian, though, some people, maybe some sermons, I know you mentioned a book earlier that the Lord used to work in your life. Talk to me a little bit about that from your perspective.
Yeah, I will say that Brother Jeff's ministry has been a big part of our lives.
Amen.
Because we discovered that when I was a teenager, and so we tuned in a lot. And
Yeah, the live stream was there, right?
Yeah,
So,
it was. It was
great.
a lifeline for us. My dad was going through a very difficult period in his ministry, and when we discovered him, and it's just neat the way that worked out with Barry King, that he was already linked. It was just a really neat.
Is that something you guys would
together.
just watch as a family, or would the church watch it sometimes, or both? Or?
We started off watching it as a family.
Okay.
My mom and I would watch it because my dad was in between churches. He'd just been fired from a church. It was really tough in his ministry. So Mom and I started watching these on a Sunday night when he wasn't preaching somewhere. Or if he was away, we would just tune in. And she said, you need to listen to this guy because he's preaching what you were preaching, but he's getting away with it. His church love him. And I know, now
Sure.
that we know Brother Jeff, we
Yeah.
know that's not always been the case.
Right,
We know
sure.
he's had hard times in his ministry too, of course. But they were just kind of on the same page about a lot of things. So I can remember sermons that he preached the night shift. He came and preached that at the Grace Baptist Partnership Conference, and that was huge, just being in a room full of church planters who were all doing the night shift, and everyone being just so encouraged. Like the whole room was crying because it was just such
Amen.
a
That's
blessing.
Good.
Yeah, there's influential people I can point to in books. I love reading. I've always enjoyed reading. There's a book called Surprised by Oxford by Carolyn Weber that's really good. If anyone says, what's your favorite book? It's a really hard question, but that's usually where I kind of land.
Okay, all right.
Just someone's conversion story and how they came to faith, but it's a really good book. Yeah, I've always enjoyed reading. Disciplines of a Godly Woman had a big impact on me as a
Barbara
teenager.
Hughes, right? Yeah.
That was really good. There's one for men as well, actually.
She mailed me a copy, or I believe you mailed me a copy of
Yeah, I
that.
did.
She was pushing you along.
When we first met, within the first 2 months, she sent me that book.
Yeah.
And so I would just like to say that,
And that one, both of those books are, I would say they're not old, but they wrote those pretty good while ago, but they've kind of stood the test. They're just good. I still give those out for counseling a lot of times.
Right.
When folks come in, if it's a lady, obviously the Disciplines of a Godly Woman. If it's a guy, Disciplines of a Godly Woman. They're just substantive. Just they cover a lot of stuff, and it's just good. Just good. Yeah.
Yeah, and just like a lot of foundational things for later in life.
Yeah.
Really good. I was given a copy of The Excellent Wife as well when Austin and I were, I think when we were dating before we were even engaged, and that was excellent as well. That was really, really good.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's always been people I've looked up to,
Sure.
but I've really enjoyed getting to know a lot of the people here at Grace Live.
Right.
That's been a blessing. And now that I've been here a few years, I've been in lots of different small groups, and that's been great too. I started out in Margot's class, and I really enjoyed getting to know Margot before we worked together. And
Right.
it's a blessing to work with her now. But Juanita Wheelis is my small group leader now. Well, we teach her class actually, so I'm an associate for her class. But I have so enjoyed being under her, and
Amen.
we've done a book study. It started off quite big, and then the second book we did, it was just me and one other woman, and that was such a blessing to just kind of soak up all of her spiritual advice, and just the kind of people that you aspire to be like.
Right.
There's one other woman who actually is part of the Anchored in Truth family. Anchored in Truth supports Daniel and Lily Shui in London, and Lily Shui is just one of the sweetest women I've ever met. One story I always think of with her as a great example is she is a wonderful support to her husband, a wonderful blessing in the church plant there. And he was supposed to go out to a conference that was for pastors, and she slipped on some ice and fell, and she cut her face really badly, like kind of through her lip, just really horrible cut. And the first thing she said was, "Oh, I'm so glad it didn't happen to Daniel so he can still go to his conference." That was the first thing she said. It wasn't ouch or like any kind of reaction. It was just, "Oh, I'm so glad it happened to me." And that kind of sums up her whole attitude. She's just a sweet, sweet person. She's prayed for my siblings and I for years, and she's just a really wonderful saint that you think, yeah, I want to be like that.
Amen. That's good.
There's one key person that we need to discuss. He knew Elspeth before I knew Elspeth, and Brother Steve McAllister is the one that has kind of not. I don't want to, puff his chest up too big, but he's the integral glue that holds this relationship together.
Yeah, there you go.
No, but he's there in the beginning. He counseled me before I went to Scotland.
Right.
He was very influential with talking me through what was going on in my life. He met with me after we came back and helped me go all the way through to baptism. Right. And he walked me through that, and we were able, and he's still. That's what I love about Brother Steve is we've not only bonded as through pastoral care, but I view him as a very good friend now. Yeah. And there are things that me and him, experiences that we share that just bond people together. Right. And so he's just been one of those people. We asked him to do our marriage ceremony, and he gladly said yes. And so he's just been one of those men that we constantly, him and Allison both, have ministered to us in so many ways. And so we're just very thankful for them because they continue to still be that for us. Yeah. And so they are kind of like a ongoing, continual part of our lives. And so we're just very thankful for them. Yeah. So anyways, I couldn't not mention that.
Yeah, and actually he was a reference point for my dad. So a lot of people kind of get worried about long-distance relationships, and there's a lot of negativity about it because you don't really know the person. Right. But for my dad, it was so neat to be able to call Brother Steve up and say, okay, if your daughter was interested in Austin, if that was a relationship, would you have a problem with that? Right. What do you know of Austin? What do you know of his family? And just to have kind of a context for you was really helpful as well. And just for him to say, yeah, he's a good guy, I wouldn't have a problem. It's good. But then, that's carried on. And he did our premarital counseling, and then he kind of did some follow-up with us after we were married too, which was really good. Yeah. So, the investment in us has been a huge blessing. Yeah,
that's good. Well, it's good to just kind of hear a little bit about you guys' story. And you guys, is obviously, your story's diverse. I think you're the only person from the UK that's here at Grace Life, Elspeth. But, at the same time, to see God's providence in you guys' relationship is kind of a smaller picture, hopefully, of how God's providence has been at work in Anchored in Truth and missions, and just to kind of put things together. I think you guys would echo this. Probably you didn't have any clue that you were going to be living in Alabama at some point. You didn't have any clue you were going to marry a girl from Scotland, and God puts that together. And so much of what God has done here at Grace Life is, and Tim would probably echo this too. If we would have strategized it and laid it out and, hey, it's going to go this way and this way and this way, it would have never worked the way it has done, right? But God has been good to put those things together. And so, so much of you guys' story is a kind of a case study of what God has done in a lot of different ways on a lot of different levels here at Grace Life. And so I appreciate you guys being willing to hang out with us and tell us a little bit about your Grace Life story. Of course, your Grace Life story is not over here. We look forward to seeing how the Lord is going to continue to use you guys and use you in ministry and bless your marriage in the days ahead. So that'll kind of wrap us up for another episode of My Grace Life Story, and we'll leave it at that. Thank you, guys.
We hope you'll join us again next week for another episode of My Grace Life Story, as members of Grace Life Church of the Shoals share their stories of redemption and grace. To find out more, visit gracelifeshoals.org. This podcast is a production of Grace Life Media.